Hey guys, another video for the How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist. This is one of those subjects that is so huge and so complex, it's always hard to know where to start and what to include and what's important to what's not important. This video was prompted by one of the patrons on Patreon. Sent a message to say that he lives in Japan and he was tutoring a high school boy in English, and suddenly the boy's mother said to him after a lesson, suddenly the mother said, and he said everything had been going really well. The boy had been improving his grades and the mother had been really happy and everything had been perfect. And even that lesson, the boy was happy, the mother was happy, everything was harmonious. And then at the end of the lesson, the mother suddenly said, this month is the last month for his English lessons, with a smile on her face. And the guy said he was surprised, and he sort of said, really? Sort of why, you know? And she just sort of smiled and said, yes, end of the month. And didn't really tell him why. And he's a really nice guy. We've exchanged a few messages, so you get the idea that he's a nice guy, an older guy, so he's pretty mellow. And he said he remembered about the harmony thing, and he tried really hard to be really friendly and polite and he said he felt really disappointed and a little bit unhappy that he felt he was getting a rough deal, because he'd been doing a good job and trying very hard and putting in extra time and so on. And he said, but he thought he did pretty well. He said to her, okay, because end of the month, she said. So he said, okay, we'll see you next week for next week's lesson, and off he went. And he said he thought he did pretty well. And then he travelled home to his home by train, and by the time he got home, the lady had phoned the dude's wife, Japanese wife, and told her that the guy had been upset. She said maybe angry. They weren't really sure what the meaning was, what she was talking about, but it sounded like he'd been upset, and it had made them feel bad. It made the mother and the boy feel bad. So they didn't want to wait till the end of the month to stop the lessons. They'd stop right then, and they didn't want any more lessons. So the next week's lesson was cancelled, and the week after that, and that was it. Right? So our man's feeling pretty bad. He'll be watching this video right now. He'll be feeling pretty bad. The only reason I'm laughing is I can totally understand this. I've had similar experiences myself. Things like this happen to foreigners who live in Japan. Things like this happen all the time. And there's a whole heap of complex stuff. I'll just tell my story quickly, if I can, just to show that, yeah, I've been there too, okay? I had one once where there was a guy that had helped me when I first came to Japan. He helped me out. He helped me get an apartment. He hooked me up with one of his friends who rented cars, who helped me get a car. And he'd help me out, you know? And we got on pretty well, and we used to drink beers, and we used to go places together, and we got on pretty well. We did motor kart racing together and things, and we got on pretty well. He's a pretty good guy. And then he went to Japan, to Australia at one time, and I helped him organise his week in Japan. So he's going with some friends. So I teed up his hotels and organised him to do a flight in Cairns, like in a small plane, where he could actually get to try the plane, like as a ITF, like a student. And then diving and all sorts. I organised them a really good week in Australia, and they went off and had a hoot, right? So he'd helped me out, I'd helped him out. As far as I was concerned, we were pretty even, right? You know, and in Japan that matters, because if someone helps you, you owe them, you know, by Japanese way of thinking, giri they call it, and obligation, and it's huge. We've talked about this on previous videos. So, but I felt we'd balanced it out pretty well. So anyway, it was all good. We'd meet now and again and drink beer and talk and things. But he was a bit of a playboy. And when I got married, I sort of lost interest in going out and drinking, because going out and drinking and talking to girls wasn't something that a newly married person was enthusiastic about doing it. As a side note, he's actually was married too. But, you know, as with a lot of Japanese men, that doesn't stop them doing whatever they want to do, you know. So he was still living that life, but I was sort of out of that life, you know. Stopped drinking, stopped talking to, going out and meeting girls and things. And to me it all seemed good, and occasionally I'd get a message from him, do you want to come and have a beer? And I'd say yeah, and I'd go and have a couple of drinks with him, and then say, oh, I've got to go home, you know, and go home. And there's a few other complications as well. Another one is in Japan there's a 0 alcohol limit when you drive the car, which means if you go out drinking, you're then limited how you're going to get home. And when you live out in the rice fields, that's a bit of a problem, you know. So there's a few logistical things, but you know, now and again. So anyway, off the track a bit. So hadn't heard from him for a while, and then at that stage, the wife was heavily pregnant and had been told to stay home and take it really easy, you know. And then the first I hear of it is suddenly another friend's wife contacts my wife and says she wants to meet up with her in a restaurant somewhere, right? And she was a bit baffled as to why, but she went and did it, heavily pregnant, not supposed to be going out of the house, not supposed to be stressed, that was a big point. So she went off and met with this woman. Now what had happened was, this dude, because we hadn't met up for a while, hadn't heard from me, he hadn't sent me messages and I'd ignored them or anything like that. He hadn't contacted me and I hadn't contacted him. I thought that was okay, you know. We weren't engaged or anything. I wasn't engaged to the dude. So he's called this other friend of mine, a mutual friend, and said to this guy, oh, you know, I did lots to help the dude out when he first came to Japan, and now, you know, he doesn't meet up with me, right? And then that dude instead of that dude contacting me directly, that dude told his wife what had happened, and then that dude's wife had contacted my wife, right? All because I hadn't been drinking beer with some dude, right? So there's some elements. Oh yeah, and then the next time I saw mate's wife, I was a bit pissed off because she dragged my heavily pregnant wife, who'd been told to stay home and not get stressed. She dragged her out to a restaurant and laid all this shit on her about me not, you know, I had this obligation to this guy and I haven't been seeing him and I should be obliged to him for helping me out. And she obviously didn't know the whole story, that I'd done things for him as well. And so she laid all this stuff on my wife about how, and all this stress. So next time I saw this lady, I wasn't really happy with her because of what she'd done. But I was sort of polite. I was sort of polite to her, but I was not happy with her, you know. And look, in most cultures we understand that, don't we? If we do something to upset someone, and we see them, and they're obviously not happy, but they're being polite to us, and they're smiling, and they're being polite. In most cultures, that's enough, isn't it? We go, oh well, I pissed him off, but he's still being nice to me, so you know he's a good guy, you know. Now this is why I'm telling the story. The parallels with that story, and with our mate's story about the mother and the son, is similar. The problem is Japanese people, and there's so much to this story, right? Japanese people are so good at hiding their feelings. Those of you who've watched the how-to playlist before would recognize this. Most, and again, these are all generalizations, but most Japanese people are really, really good at hiding their real emotions. And when you live here and you have Japanese friends and family members and things, and you know the truth about a situation, and then you actually see, you know that person really doesn't like that person or something like that, and then you see them together and you'd never know it, you know. And this is what messes up a lot of people who come to Japan, and we hear this all the time. We'll make a video on the how-to playlist about, you know, if you come to Japan you shouldn't do this, and we always get comments from people, and not recently because we don't have comments on our videos, but in the past we'd get comments from people who'd say, that's not true, I came to Japan and I did that thing and nobody minded at all, right? And this is what catches foreigners out all the time, is that Japanese people, if they don't like what you're doing, or they don't like you, or they're not happy about something, they will hide it so well you will never know. You will never know. And the problem is that most of us are not so good at that. So when our mate was told that these lessons are stopping, and then he said what really bothered him is the lady didn't tell him why. She just said it's stopping. And see, that's a Japanese thing as well. If something in a situation like that, they either won't tell you why, and it's polite not to ask why. You just go, oh, okay. And what a Japanese person would have done in that situation would have been to say, oh, that's fine, no problem at all, that'll give me lots more time to do something else, and that's fine, that's wonderful, and they'd really be convincing that it was all okay and it wasn't a problem, and then off they'd go, you know. Whereas with our mate, he was obviously really bothered by it, and he tried to be polite and gentle and quiet and kind about it, but obviously they could see that he was unhappy, and that made them feel bad. And even though it's sort of their fault that he's feeling bad, they don't want that bad feeling. They want the harmony thing. So their solution to that is to not see him again. And the way they do that is not to tell him, okay, look, we don't want to do this anymore, or send him a message and say, let's not do any more lessons at all. Their way to do it, to try and avoid any sort of confrontation, is to call his wife and talk to her about it. You know, and this is what Japanese people do this as well. It's often the senpai kohai thing as well. The senior, they'll call someone who's senior to you. Sometimes with foreigners, they'll do it. They'll contact a Japanese person who's their go-between or something, and tell the Japanese person. But Japanese people do it to each other too. In my story, there were 3 Japanese people in my story, and any of them could have cut a corner. They didn't have to all be involved, but the way they do it, this is the way they do it. They all talk to the person who's not really involved and who's easiest for them to talk to get the story back to the person who is involved, you know? And the things like this, when you talk to people who've lived in Japan long term, or people who lived in Japan long term and then left, things like this are often the reason why. Is because the rules, and again, as with all our videos, this isn't complaining, this is just pointing out the differences, the cultural differences to the way things are done in Japan compared with what they're done in some other countries. And that's all it is. It's a cultural difference, but this cultural difference can be huge when you live here, because all the things, you know, in a lot of our cultures, if you have an issue with someone, you go straight to them, don't you? You know, and that guy, in my example, that guy and I, you know, people often say, I've got lots of Japanese friends. Yeah, maybe. But one of the things that stops a lot of people who are not Japanese being friendly, being real friends, or feeling that they have a real friend in Japan, is things like this. Because here's a guy who you know, we'd spent a lot of time together, and some people would have said, oh, those guys are friends, you know. But when it came to the crunch, you know, instead of just sending me a message and saying to me, hey, I haven't seen you forever, what's going on, let's have a beer, to which I would have said yes, without any hesitation at all, instead of doing that, which is what a lot of us from other cultures would consider to be the normal thing to do, instead of doing that, he's called the other guy, told the other guy, and again, that guy and I get on pretty well as well. And from an outsider's point of view, they'd say that we're friends as well. So why didn't he just contact me and say, hey, what's going on with this dude? Which he didn't do. Instead of doing that, he told his wife. And then his wife told my wife, and then my wife told me. And so what that means is those 2 dudes in that story, who I'd spent time with both of them doing all sorts of things, and an outsider would have said, oh, you know, they're your friends, aren't they? You know, it leaves you feeling very isolated, because in a lot of our cultures, friends wouldn't do that, would they? You know, friends wouldn't do that. They'd just say, hey mate, haven't seen you for ages, let's have a beer. Wouldn't they? They wouldn't be calling someone else to complain that you hadn't seen you, right? It's like some sort of, what's that like? Some sort of teenage girl thing. I don't know what that is. Who behaves like that, you know? Who behaves like that? And so for most of us, that sort of behavior is isolating, because it leaves you feeling like you don't have a connection with that person. That you don't. He's not really my friend. A friend wouldn't do that to me. You know, a friend wouldn't do that to me. So that's one part of this story that people often feel here. That, you know, and when we hear people say now and again, someone, oh, I've got lots of Japanese friends. I live in Japan. I've got lots of Japanese friends. Well, it depends on what your definition of a friend is, because, you know, no doubt there'll be people who like talking to you in the bar, or there's people that like having some free English from you, or people who are good fun to be with. I mean, no doubt there's definitely all sorts of people here that great company and great to spend time with, but when it really comes down to it, you know, and when something like this happens, that's where you really see the cultural difference, you know, and it can leave you feeling really, you know. We had another one just briefly. There was another one once who I felt a guy I got on with pretty well, and he told me he told me two things. One was, I told him that I thought that spending time with our kids as much as possible is really important, and he said to him, yeah, that's the most important thing. And the other one was talking about old houses, and we're talking about how new houses are a bit of a waste of money because they devalue so quickly, and buying an old one, doing it up's best. Yeah, I agree with you. He said, I'll do that too. And then he bought a brand new house, and then he took a job in Singapore, and he goes and works there 51 weeks of the year and never sees his kids at all, or 1 week a year he sees his kids, right? So he did the total opposite of what he said he believed in. And again, that leaves you really isolated there because you think, well, I don't really believe anything this guy says anymore. So that's the first issue with this story, is what people say and what they really do, and the friendship thing, the connection thing. The other one is that because of wanting to avoid any sort of conflict, they won't tell you. They won't say, look, I'm going to stop the lessons because, I'm not sure this is a good thing. They'll, if they give you a reason, it might be true or it might be a lie. And that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. They might tell you a lie, oh, we can't afford it, or he's too busy with club, rather than say, oh, we don't think the lessons are worth it, or we don't think English is that important, or something like that. If they do give you an answer, it's likely to be not true anyway. So that's why pushing for an answer, pushing for an answer or reason why, asking why, almost any situation in Japan, asking why is a waste of time. It really is. And you'll notice Japanese people rarely ask why. They just accept whatever's happening. They just accept it and put on the happy face, and rarely do they ask why, because there's no point. You'll either not get an answer, which is like a which is no answer, or if you do get an answer, it's probably not true anyway. So asking why is a waste of time. And then going to the other person, that can be really frustrating. It's like, why don't they come to me? And because then you can't go back to that first person and say, what's your story? Making all this drama for me with all these people. Why don't you just come to me directly, you weak person, You can't do that either. So, and actually that's the other part of this too. It doesn't matter who's in the wrong. It's how you react to it. And you'll see this in Japan as well. If a person does the wrong thing by you, you can't react to it. If you react to it, the other people in your life here, your friends or family or neighbours or the other Japanese people around you in your life here, your co-workers, your boss, they won't say, oh, that person did the wrong thing by him, so, his reaction is understandable. They won't do that. They won't do that. You will get in trouble. And no one will understand. So if someone does the wrong thing by you and you react to it, and in a way that's not harmonious, and that can be sad too. It not just talking about getting angry. I mean, getting angry would be the end of the world, right? If you get angry here and show anger, you're suicide. It's suicide. It's social suicide, because nobody excuses getting angry here. So getting angry would be the end of you. But even getting sad, our man with his story with the mother and the son, he's more sad and disappointed. He was disappointed more than anything else, and that's what they would have sensed, and that makes them feel bad. And they know if he comes back next week for another lesson, that they're going to feel that feeling again. They don't want that feeling, so that's why and then they can't tell him, they can't send him a message and say don't come next week. So instead of that, they call his wife, because they're not going to have a bad feeling with her because she's not directly involved. She wasn't there. So they can ring up and exchange all the Japanese pleasantries with her, and she'll be all cool and groovy, and there'll be no bad vibe with her at all, and tell her that, oh, we've got some bad feelings here, and so we don't want to, and because she's Japanese, she'll totally understand. And then hubby comes home and she says, oh, they called and said, don't come next week. And because he's shattered, right? The feelings, I totally understand. When I read that message, that's why I made this video. Because I know those feelings, It's just, it's baffling, it's frustrating, and particularly when you're trying really hard. When you're trying really hard to sort of keep a straight face and show, oh, it's fine, and you're trying to be cool, and you're doing your very best, but they've sensed your disappointment and unhappiness, and they feel bad about it, and you're going to get a penalty for it. And because our man needs the money, he needs those extra couple of lessons, till the end of the month, and he's not going to get them now. So he's going to lose some money there as well, you know, and that stresses him out as well. And then that feeling of, I just before making this video, I could think of lots of examples of this too, where some injustice happens to you, and it's indirect like this, and you don't get a chance to address it. You don't get a chance to say to that first person, hey, look, come on, that's not reasonable. You don't get that chance, and you just have to accept it. You just have to accept it and go, okay. And any reaction from you that's not the standard Japanese reaction to it is not going to be understood, and is not going to be accepted. So you know, I don't know about that guy's wife. I don't know how he didn't sort of mention much about that, but generally, you know, the average Japanese person here is just going to say, well, yeah, that's all normal, and they're just trying to avoid that. What they'll do is they'll try and explain it and justify it. So they'll say, oh yes, well, she phoned because she was just trying to avoid any bad feelings, right? And so from a Japanese person's point of view, that mother's behavior in calling was a totally reasonable and understandable thing to do that everybody else would do too. So it's just so complex. No doubt after stopping this video, I'm going to remember lots of other things that I should have mentioned. There's just so many layers to this social stuff in Japan. There's so many layers. It's so deep. There's so many layers to it, you know, and it's just cultural difference, you know. Some of it is infuriating and frustrating, and a real sense of injustice sometimes, you know, with things like this, where that guy's obviously done the right thing, and that never knowing. I can think of lots of examples where this has happened to me as well, where there's been some bad reaction to something, and I go, what did I do? What did I do? And you'll never know. And I've got friends, and a friend just came to mind too, who often says that. I don't know what I did. And it happens a lot here, that suddenly someone's off you and there's something sort of happens as a result, and you don't know why, and no one can tell you, and no one will tell you. And because see, they see, the Westerners, a lot of us see, if we have some problem with someone, talking to them about it is beneficial, isn't it? The way a lot of us see it. Whereas they see that just compounds the drama and makes the drama bigger. So their way to deal with any sort of thing like this is just to kill it as quickly as possible, quietly as possible, and not talk about it. And no one wants to talk about it after it happens. That's it, it's over. And we all just go about our life as if it never happened. And because for a lot of us, it's in the back of your head, what happened with that? Why did they cancel that lesson, you know? And you get a lot of that. You get a lot of that here, where you think, well, what did I do? Why is that guy not happy with me? Why is that person, or what happened there? And you'll never know. You'll never know. The only way, if you want to live here, and this is why the statistics show that most people that come to Japan to live here long term don't. They go home early, and these are the reasons why. Because you can't do it your way. There's always someone that says, oh, I'm not Japanese, I'll do it my way. I'll tell him. And then what happens is, if they do tell him, then the Japanese people around you in your life, your wife and your neighbours and your co-workers and your boss and everybody around you, will think you are the problem. And it's as unfair as that feels, it's just the way they see it. That if someone does the wrong thing by you, you've got to smooth it as quickly as possible and never mention it again. And if you do anything at all, if you react in any way at all, even if it's just sadness, that you're compounding the problem and making it worse. And then they start to think that you're the problem. And it's such a feeling of injustice. It's like, I didn't do anything. Why am I in trouble? But that's what it feels like. That's what happens. So this is a how-to video. Try and do it as well as you can the same way the Japanese people do it. That's our advice. I mean, a lot of other people say, oh, do whatever you want. You know, I'm not Japanese. I'll do it my way. That's fine. You can do that too. But having seen the results and the consequences of the different approaches, the best approach seems to be just to keep trying as hard as you can to do it the Japanese way, as hard as that is. And it leaves you feeling really alone sometimes, because no one understands your feeling about these things. And that's why our man sent the message, because he was feeling like nobody's getting it. Nobody understands why this is so frustrating and upsetting. And yeah, that's right. That's right. They don't get it, because it's a cultural difference. So the same way some of us feel that their way is pretty strange, they think our reactions are pretty childish and strange too. if we react in a different way. So there it is. Anyway, hopefully something in there was of use to somebody or mildly interesting. Anyway, more videos coming soon.